You are standing outside and the sun is brutal. Your shirt is soaked. Your mouth is dry. Your brain is telling you to stop moving, find shade, and do absolutely nothing until this is over. And for the first time in a long time, your brain is giving you exactly the right advice. Because that instinct you are feeling right now is not weakness. It is 3 million years of survival logic running perfectly in the background. Here is what almost no one tells you about heat. Your body does not struggle in the heat because it was built wrong. It struggles because it was built for a version of summer that no longer exists. A version where shade was not a coffee shop, where water was not a tap, where surviving a heat wave was a genuine life or death problem that your ancestors solved generation after generation with nothing but their bodies, their instincts, and each other. What did ancient humans actually do when it got too hot? The answer is not what you would expect. And once you understand it, you will never feel lazy on a hot day again. Start with the body itself. Before behavior, before culture, before fire or tools or language, your ancestors had one piece of technology built directly into their skin. Sweat glands, not just a few. Around 2 to 4 million of them, scattered across almost every surface of your body. No other primate comes close. Chimpanzees, gorillas, orangutans, they sweat very little. They pant. They seek shade. They stop. But the lineage that eventually became you went in a radically different direction. According to evolutionary biologist Daniel Lieberman at Harvard University, the expansion of eccrine sweat glands in early Homo was not incidental. It was the unlock that made everything else possible. It meant that your ancestors could stay active in heat that would shut down almost every other large land mammal on the planet. But sweating is only half the story. The other half is what your ancestors chose to do with that ability, and the choices they made were stranger, smarter, and more social than you probably imagined. The first thing ancient humans did in extreme heat was exactly what your body is screaming at you to do right now. They stopped. Not forever. Not out of failure. They stopped strategically. Anthropologist Richard Wrangham, whose fieldwork with early human populations and great apes spans decades, has documented what he calls the midday rest as one of the most universal behavioral patterns in human prehistory. In environments where summer temperatures regularly exceeded 40 degrees Celsius, early Homo populations across East Africa and the Levant consistently reduced movement during peak sun hours. Not because they were lazy, because the caloric cost of moving in that heat outweighed any possible gain. Your body burns significantly more energy thermoregulating, keeping itself cool, when it is also moving. Stop moving, and the body can redirect those resources entirely toward keeping your core temperature from crossing the threshold that kills you. It was metabolic math. And here is the part your modern nervous system has never quite let go of. That crushing, heavy, almost narcotic feeling you get on a very hot afternoon. The one that makes concentration nearly impossible, and your eyelids feel like wet sand. That is not laziness, and it is not weakness. That is your hypothalamus. The small but extraordinarily powerful structure sitting at the base of your brain, detecting that your core temperature is climbing and actively suppressing your drive to do things. It is doing exactly what it was designed to do. Researcher Matthew Walker at the University of California, Berkeley has studied midday sleep and rest across cultures and noted that populations living near the equator, where heat pressure was greatest, naturally evolved biphasic sleep cycles, meaning they did not just sleep once at night. They also rested briefly in the early afternoon. Siesta culture across the Mediterranean and Central America is not a cultural quirk. It is a physiological inheritance from heat-adapted ancestors who learned that the most dangerous time to be active was the middle of the day. So your ancestors stopped. They found shade. What came next? They gathered. This is where the story gets genuinely surprising. Modern humans, when heat becomes unbearable, tend to isolate. You close the blinds. You turn on a fan. You scroll your phone in silence. But for most of human prehistory, extreme heat was a social trigger, not an isolating one. Think about what shade actually was in the ancient world. A single large tree, a rock overhang, a narrow canyon wall. Shade was scarce and finite. If you found it, others found it too. Whole bands of 10, 20, sometimes 30 individuals would converge on the same patch of shadow during the hottest part of the day. Archaeological evidence from sites in the Kalahari Basin, analyzed by researcher Larry Keeley in his work on prehistoric social behavior, suggests that these convergence points were not just resting zones. They were processing hubs. Tools were knapped. Food was distributed. Social bonds were reinforced. Stories, in whatever form they took, were shared. The midday heat forced a pause. And inside that pause, community happened. You have probably felt a version of this. A hot summer afternoon where you ended up sitting under a tree with people you barely knew. By the time the sun shifted, something had changed. The heat had stripped away the usual urgency. There was nowhere to be. Nothing felt worth rushing toward. And so you talked. Actually talked. Not about logistics. About things that matter. Your ancestors did the same thing for hundreds of thousands of years. But community alone does not solve the survival problem. Your ancestors also had to drink. And this is where the picture of ancient human behavior becomes both beautiful and astonishing. Because finding water in a hot environment, especially in the African savannas, where the early Homo lineage spent most of its evolutionary history, was not simple. Water holes were dangerous. Predators knew where they were. They clustered near them. Going to water in the heat of the day meant potentially walking into a lion, waiting patiently in the shade of the same shoreline acacia you were hoping to reach. So your ancestors adapted their behavior around water with startling precision. They moved to water at the coolest parts of the day, early morning and late evening. When that was not possible, they sourced water from locations that required reading the landscape itself. Certain plants in arid environments store water in their roots and stems. Certain rock surfaces collect dew at dawn. The Kung San people of the Kalahari, whose lifestyle offers one of the closest living windows into the foraging patterns of our deep ancestors, are documented by anthropologist Marjorie Shostak as regularly using hollow reeds to extract water from deep within sand in dry riverbeds, a technique that requires detailed environmental knowledge passed down across generations. Water knowledge was survival knowledge, and in the heat, it was the most precious thing a group could share. There is something else your ancestors did in the heat that no modern person would think to do. They moved differently. The popular image of early humans as constant wanderers, covering massive distances every day in search of food, breaks down when you look carefully at heat. Tracking studies of contemporary foraging populations, carried out in part by anthropologist Kim Hill across field sites in South America and Africa, show that in high heat conditions, daily movement distances drop dramatically. But the movement that does happen is reconfigured around shade corridors. Bands would navigate from shade point to shade point, resting at each one, moving during the brief cooler windows between roughly 6 and 10 in the morning, and again from 4 in the afternoon onward. The landscape was read not just for food or water, but for shadow. Where would shade be in 2 hours? Which direction does that canyon face? When does that hill block the sun? Your ancestors were not just surviving the heat. They were reading it, mapping it, negotiating with it. And when the heat finally broke, when the sun dropped and the temperature began to fall, that was when the real work began. Hunting in some regions happened at night. Gathering happened in the early morning when plants were coolest and richest in moisture. Fire, which your ancestors were managing with increasing skill from roughly 400,000 years ago onward, extended the usable hours beyond sunset and created the one thing heat could not take away, a warm, lit social space that belonged to the night. There is a final piece of this picture that is almost never talked about: clothing, or rather, the absence of it. For the vast majority of human evolutionary history, your ancestors wore very little. In high heat environments, this was not poverty. It was precision. The same skin that held your millions of sweat glands needed airflow to function. Covering it trapped heat. The body was, in its native state, a remarkably efficient cooling system, provided you let it breathe. The move toward clothing happened gradually, driven not by heat but by cold, by protection, by social signaling. But in the ancestral heat of summer, bare skin and slow movement and collective shade were the 3 pillars of survival. Your body still knows all of this. That is the part that should stop you in your tracks. When you feel the urge to do nothing in the afternoon heat, that is ancestral logic. When you find yourself gravitating toward other people in the shade, that is a behavioral inheritance older than language. When you feel thirsty before you feel hungry in the summer, that is your body's fluid prioritization system working exactly as it was calibrated to work across millions of years. You are not bad at summer. You are a human in summer. And for almost the entire length of human existence, that meant slowing down, coming together, reading the landscape, moving at the edges of the day, and letting the heat do what heat has always done, strip everything back to what actually matters. The next time the sun hits hard and your body tells you to stop, find shade and sit with someone. Listen to it. Your ancestors would recognize exactly what you are feeling. They felt it too, and they are the reason you are here to feel it at all.